Lion Power!
Hello and welcome back to the channel. We've talked in the past about this whole craze of overhauling Japanese anime for Western audiences back in the 80s and 90s, and how some shows came through more or less intact while others were completely butchered in the transition. And today's is one of the wildest cases in the bunch. Why, you might ask? It's because this one wasn't even translated, it was just rebuilt from scratch by people who had never read a word of it. I'm talking about Voltron, the show an entire generation grew up on, and the way darker and stranger Japanese anime it actually came from.
Voltron, Defender of the Universe.
If you grew up with it in the US or Canada, you remember 1984's Voltron show a certain way. Let me guess. 5 robot lions clanking together into a giant sword-swinging hero, gloriously cheesy dialogue, and a villain list where every defeated foe conveniently explodes and gets waved off as just a robot. It was pure Saturday morning breakfast entertainment. Bright, moralistic, low stakes, nobody ever really gets hurt, and everyone's fine by the next episode. The team's just kinda there, defending planet Eris, and we never much questioned where they came from or their backstory or anything because we were kids. We were there for the lions. But that's not how it started out. In Japan, the original series was called Beast King GoLion, a 1981 Toei series, and it doesn't ease you in gently at all. It literally opens with a group of astronauts returning from a space mission to find that Earth has just nuked itself into oblivion. The pilots are then captured and dragged off to a conquered world where slavery, torture, and death are just everyday routine. One of the 5 heroes gets killed off for good within the first handful of episodes. That's right, this supposed kids show is steeped in a really bleak and lore-heavy universe, right down to a villain whose fixation on the heroine is tangled up in his own mother's murder, not some schoolboy crush. Mind you, it's not unrecognizably different. It's got the same animation, the same 5-lion robot, and the same basic cast, but between a dub written with no script at all, the workarounds invented to hide every single death, the flattening of the villain, and a softened finale designed to keep toys on shelves, you end up with 2 vastly dissimilar shows wearing the exact same face. So we're breaking down the biggest differences between Japan's Beast King GoLion and America's Voltron, Defender of the Universe. Ready? Let's get into it. GoLion splits into 2 shows, the mix-up that started it all. We have to start here actually because it's one of my favorite bits of the whole saga. Believe it or not, this whole thing started with a postal accident. That's right, World Events Productions, the American studio, actually wanted to adapt a completely different Toei robot show called Future Robot Daltanius. When they asked Toei for the master tapes, the story goes that they requested the one with the lion, but didn't elaborate at all, and so Toei went ahead and shipped them Beast King GoLion instead. A total accident, but a happy one as it turns out, because once WEP watched what they'd been sent, they liked it more and just ran with it. Another funny angle is that Daltanius, the show they meant to get, actually contained one of each type of robot Voltron would eventually be famous for: a lion, a vehicle, and a humanoid gladiator, so it didn't really make much difference in the long run. There was a snag though, and what good story doesn't have one? American syndication needed a minimum of around 65 episodes to be worth selling, and GoLion had only 52. Not enough. So WEP put it together with a second, totally unrelated Toei series, Armored Fleet Die Ruger 15, to pad out the runtime, eventually reaching 124 episodes across the 2 shows. And this is why Voltron awkwardly splits into a Lion Force and a Vehicle Force that have basically nothing to do with one another. Huge chunks of the show come from a separate anime entirely, with dubbed-over dialogue trying to convince you that they belong in the same universe. The new name, Voltron, wiped away any hint that this was actually 2 shows stitched together, and nobody really noticed or cared because we were kids. And the action was cool. It was a pretty clever trick that worked out pretty well. A dub written without ever reading a script. If there's one section that explains everything about Voltron, it's probably this one, so hang on. World Events Productions had no English translation of GoLion to work from. None. So instead of waiting around for a translation or trying to translate it themselves, the producers just sat and watched the Japanese footage, made a rough guess of what was going on, and had a writer named Jameson Brewer invent brand new English dialogue to fit whatever was happening on screen. Now, that's an insane way to make a TV show. I mean, it's not even dubbing in the sense we know it, where you translate the lines and reshape them to fit the mouths speaking. Here, they basically just wrote an entirely new script and pasted it over somebody else's finished animation, guessing at the plot from whatever the characters were doing on screen. This is exactly why Voltron is riddled with those infamous logic gaps we all kinda noticed as kids. Characters referencing events we never saw, people somehow knowing things they'd have no way of knowing, motivations that change from one scene to the next. Turns out, when you narrate a story you literally can't read, it's gonna get messy. I mean, just try and rewatch it, because knowing this makes it a completely different experience. Half the show's charm literally came from a team of Americans confidently improvising over footage they only half understood and actually getting away with it. It's kind of hilarious. We can't believe this actually happened, let alone released on television and became enormously popular. Earth's nuclear apocalypse quietly erased. As I mentioned earlier, GoLion doesn't exactly hold your hand. It opens in the distant future of 1999, and it shows the 5 pilots coming home from a space mission only to discover that the superpowers of Earth have launched a full nuclear war and wiped out the rest of humanity. Their planet is a graveyard before the story even begins, which is probably the bleakest setup for an animated series I've ever heard. Also, keep in mind that this was airing to Japanese kids in 1981, which was at the height of Cold War nuclear dread, so it landed with some serious weight. Voltron cuts the whole thing. It's just gone. Instead, the American version just shows the team arriving on planet Eris, sent by a space agency to deal with an alien empire, with zero mention of what's going on back home. Earth's just fine, apparently, and probably thriving. No grief or loss here, folks, and this is maybe the most blatant example of the disparity between these two shows. An ominous and intriguing world-ending premise swapped out for a breezy, off to save the galaxy kinda intro. And the audience was none the wiser. We literally had no idea the heroes we were cheering for were, in the original, the last survivors of a dead planet, and that they carried that burden of grief into every fight. Tonally, that difference alone makes it a very different show, and it happens in the first 5 minutes. A rampaging beast god, not just a machine. You'd think they'd leave the robot alone, but nope, that origin took a hit too. In GoLion's mythology, the Great Machine wasn't built by anyone at all. GoLion actually used to be a single prideful mechanical beast god that tore across the universe unchecked and out of control until a goddess defeated it and split it into 5 separate lions as punishment for its arrogance. The lore has the vibe of ancient Greek myth and grandeur, the robot obviously being a fallen deity serving out a sentence as penance. Pretty cool stuff, honestly, and it gives the lions a sense of ancient and divine menace instead of just being cool robot machines. Voltron drops all of that for something that made it easier to sell toys. Here, Voltron is a robotic warrior of legend created to defend the universe, which was split into 5 lions by the witch Hagar and then hidden on planet Eris. It was simple, kid-friendly, and it was missing the unsettling idea that the heroic robot your kid wants to buy is actually a cosmic god being punished. It's also ironic how in 1998 there was a CGI follow-up called Voltron the Third Dimension, which drifted back to treating the lions as sentient beings. That means Voltron just circled right back to the very mythology the original adaptation had thrown out 15 years earlier. What goes around comes around eventually, I guess? Sven doesn't survive episode 6. Not even close. Ask anybody who grew up on 80s Voltron, and I guarantee they were just completely baffled by this guy called Sven at some point. So, in GoLion, the Blue Lion pilot, Takashi Shirogane, is killed off in episode 6, dying of his wounds after a brutal battle with the witch Honerva's monster. It's not a trick, there's no tease of a comeback, what you actually get is a funeral. The death is very much final, and the show is clearly telling you very early on that its heroes can actually die, which instantly raises the stakes for every battle to follow. Voltron couldn't have that, obviously. You gotta be as kid-friendly as possible. So Sven, the equivalent character, is just critically injured and then sent off to recover on a hospital planet. His survival is strongly implied, and here's where it gets really tangled. GoLion actually has 2 Shirogane brothers, identical twins. And the younger one, Ryo, turns up later to join the fight. So when Voltron needed Sven back, WEP just had Ryo show up and pretend to be Sven. I'm not joking, they literally made 2 separate Japanese characters into one very confusing American one. No wonder we all used to argue on the school bus about why the heck Sven was like that. And poor Voltron, Sven doesn't even get a break. He survives, sure, but then he's enslaved, nearly worked to death, and basically just completely put through the ringer. Even the gentle version of his story is somehow still pretty painful. As Prince Zuko from Avatar would say, that's rough, buddy. Death by excuse. The running gag nobody planned. Once you notice how Voltron handles death, you cannot unnotice it because it just goes for the same excuses over and over. A character who dies on screen in GoLion has, in the dub, simply gone back to their home planet. Enemies who are outright slain are said to have been knocked into a deep sleep instead. And the funniest one is the one that happens time and time again. Anyone inconveniently killed turns out to have secretly been a robot double the whole time, so a real person was never ever harmed. This strategy reaches almost heroic levels of denial. Koran, the team's steady older mentor, has a GoLion backstory in which his wife and infant son were presumably killed during the Empire's assault. Voltron reworks this completely, and it's literally stated that his family is safe in another dimension. There's a storyline where a boy shows up and everyone starts hoping it's his long-lost son, but then the original reveals the kid genuinely died and this is just an imposter. Can you imagine the kind of knots the dub tied itself in trying to make this storyline make sense? I don't even want to try to untangle it if I'm being honest, but by the time we hit the second half of the show, the American writers had shamelessly settled on, actually, they were a robot, as the default explanation for any body they needed to make vanish. Once you know this and are actively looking out for it, these relentlessly and blatantly stupid cover-ups honestly just become their own kind of comedy. The enemy empire gets a serious makeover. In Voltron, the villainous empire is evil in the tidy way villains are in kids' cartoons. They enslave people, they force them into labor, they make them fight the monstrous robeasts in an arena. Awful, definitely, but still within limits for Saturday morning TV. Voltron doesn't take any risks and just shows the basics of what a child would assume a tyrant is like. Meanwhile, GoLion's Galra Empire is a goddamn beast. Slaves who are too weak or sick to be useful are killed and fed to the Empire's beastmen, and survivors don't have it much better as they're eventually transformed into beastmen themselves. Seriously, it dives into full body horror territory. And there's this one horrific plotline where human blood rains across the planet Altea. That's the Japanese version, but you know what Voltron rewrites it into? Berry juice, of all things. There was also an episode that had a squad of blue-skinned killers gleefully murdering their way through crowds of helpless civilians, complete with a lot of on-screen blood, and you guessed it, nothing of that scene remains in the American cut at all. It's the same evil empire in both shows, but when Voltron hands you a cartoon villain of the week, GoLion doesn't shy away from going full horror. Whole planets die, and the show just shrugs. There's a Voltron episode about the destruction of Pidge's home planet. Yep, they actually show it. I'm not kidding, and it's a great example of the show going somewhere dark, but not actually showing it as dark or impactful to the characters who witness it. In GoLion, the devastation that comes with an entire world being lost is a serious tragedy, and it clearly weighs heavily on those affected by it. Meanwhile, Voltron quickly added a line assuring that everybody got off the planet safely before the villain started his dirty work, so woof, nobody actually died. Chill. Besides the sanitizing and censorship, the most frustrating aspect is that the show can't maintain any continuity of emotion. Barely seconds after Pidge tearfully reacts to his planet's apparent destruction, he's already cracking jokes with the space mice. Sure, the people might have survived, but his whole home planet just got blown up. Even as a kid, you're like, wow, that grief just went away like nothing. And that really sums up Voltron. Keep the dramatic-looking footage because it looks exciting, but throw the actual heavy consequences into the garbage and never ever let anything sad hang around long enough to actually let kids start thinking about it. The villain's obsession gets a much softer rewrite. Okay, so this is where the original gets a little uncomfortable, but if you're used to Japanese anime, you probably won't flinch. Anyways, in GoLion, Prince Sincline's fixation on Princess Fala isn't a simple crush, it's actually rooted in trauma. His mother was an Altian woman his father, the Emperor, had abducted and turned into a concubine. She was murdered by his father when Sincline was just a child after she begged him to spare a group of civilians. Fala happens to look strikingly like that woman, and the show frames Sincline's obsession as something twisted rather than romantic, which is actually accurate and pretty grim for a kids show, wouldn't you say? It also makes him a far more tragic and unstable figure than the version most of us grew up with. Voltron flat out removes any hint of trauma or Oedipal complex. Prince Lotor, aka American Syncline, just fancies Princess Allura, aka American Fala, full stop. There's no weird family connections underneath, which means he just comes off as a generic lovesick simp. And there's a further twist the dub never touches, and even a lot of fans get this muddled. The witch Honerva is actually revealed, right at the very end, to be the Emperor's own mother, and she's also the one to finally reveal that Syncline's dead mother was Altian. Meanwhile, in Voltron, the witch Honerva is shown to be Lotor's mother. Every reference to Syncline's murdered mom was just shown as Lotor simply daydreaming about a grown-up Allura. Yeesh. This was unknown to most Western fans for years until someone finally translated the original Japanese into English. The shockwave that went through the fandom after that must have been off the charts. The episodes aired in a completely different order. GoLion was a serialized chronological story that built up steadily from beginning to end, like a novel where each chapter sets up the next. But when it comes to Voltron's Lion Force run, with the extra 20 newly animated episodes on top of the original 52, the American broadcast order just got completely scrambled. Yikes. Also, before anyone starts trying to justify it, this wasn't some creative decision. There was no thought or planning put into it at all. It was just a side effect of production rush. The new episodes got put into the schedule whenever they were finished, instead of waiting for where those episodes actually belonged in the story. Obviously, this led to a bunch of plot holes, and every broadcasted episode had characters referencing things or reacting to relationships that, as far as the audience could tell, hadn't happened or been established yet. I mean, the opening and closing runs stayed pretty close to GoLion's original sequence, which is something, I guess, but the middle just completely fell apart. So if Voltron's continuity ever felt a bit loose to you as a kid, if characters seemed to know each other before they'd met or forgot things they'd just learned, you weren't imagining it, just blame American production schedules and move on. A villain who actually dies versus one who just won't leave. Fittingly, we left the whole villain debacle for last, but it definitely isn't the least. GoLion was written with a fully actualized ending. Its finale has loads of things happening to actually close the story out. Emperor Daibazal is destroyed in battle with help from the spirit of Fala's late father. Honerva betrays Syncline and is killed by him in turn, and then Syncline himself dies, plunging from the collapsing castle locked together with Ryo Shirogane, who sacrifices his life to avenge his murdered twin. Nope, you're not imagining it. Mostly everyone of consequence is dead by the time the credits roll, and the story ends very much like a tragedy. Voltron couldn't allow any of that because, well, dead characters don't sell toys, and it just means a lot of parents complaining that their children got traumatized. So King Zarkon, the Daibazal equivalent, just survives past the point where his original counterpart died, carrying on as the franchise's recurring big bad and swanning back in for the 1986 special Fleet of Doom. Syncline's death gets similarly waved away, which means Lotor just keeps on menacing the team with no end in sight. The way they changed the finale is maybe the cleanest possible way to show off just how much they changed and molded for the American audience. Where GoLion was written as a self-contained tragedy with a real permanent ending, a childhood epic of sorts, Voltron is an action-packed, never-ending engine that can never stop and just keeps going like it's The Simpsons. It's a story that can't be allowed to conclude because to sell merchandise, you need a show that keeps going, and to keep a show going, you need the villains and all the characters to keep coming back next season and the season after that. And I mean, that just kind of nicely sums this whole debacle up, wouldn't you say? We're mostly done now, but I just want to put these two side by side one last time. In Japan, Beast King GoLion is a bleak post-apocalyptic mecha tragedy where mythology is history, death is permanent, villains carry real psychological scars, and the finale actually finishes the story. In America, Voltron, Defender of the Universe, takes the same footage, sometimes even exactly the same frames, and reframes it as a safe, punchy, kid-friendly adventure where nobody really dies, and every fallen enemy was secretly a robot all along. This just goes on every single week, over and over again. And all of it just came down to a production team watching footage from a Japanese studio, and instead of waiting for a translation or a script, they just invented their own dialogue from scratch and cheerfully plastered it over anything too dark to explain to 1980s American censors and parents. Nothing in Voltron was the result of careful and deliberate story choices or planning. So if you only ever watched Voltron growing up, switching to Beast King GoLion can feel like suddenly stumbling onto a completely different, much darker AU, when the reality is that it's the original source material. I genuinely want to go and rewatch both shows with all of this in mind, just because this is such a fascinating case study in just how far a show can get twisted from the source while keeping all the same visuals and animation. So which one of these changes surprised you the most? Are there any changes you're on board with? And if you've seen both shows, which do you prefer? Let us know in the comments section down below, and if you enjoyed this one, smash that like and subscribe button to see more videos like it. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.